Sometimes we get to thinking that the only things that Jesus does are teach people and preach and heal people. Well, and die and rise from the dead. But would you believe that Jesus loved to tell stories? They were the kind of stories that he would make up with these characters that would share some deep meaning and purpose, would reveal some beautiful lesson, and we call them parables. And Jesus told many of these stories, probably more than we have written down in the Bible. And even there in that Bible, there are more than I could just tell you right now. But one time Jesus was approached by a young lawyer, and this young man asked him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus turned it around with a question and said, "Well, what does it say in the law?" And the man says, "Well, to love God and love your neighbor." Then he said, "Well, so who is my neighbor?" And Jesus, he knew that quoting more laws was not going to help this young man. And so Jesus quotes the law of love. He tells a story. He tells a story about a man who is traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as he was going, this man was robbed. And he wasn't just robbed of his things, but he was beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. Not too long later, a priest came by, a holy man. And this man, if he had touched the blood of this man who was injured, if he actually up and died on him, he would be ritually defiled and he couldn't do his job. And so that priest kept going. A little while later, a Levite came by, and he was a busy man. And he didn't have time to stop. And in fact, he was also a smart man. And he knew that sometimes this is what robbers would do. That robbers would pretend to be injured. And then as soon as you stop, the rest would swoop in and attack you. And so he passed by also. And then a Samaritan came by. Now, if you'll remember, Samaritans are those folks from the northern kingdom. Those heathens from the north who thumbed their nose at God and were conquered. The people of Judah had no mercy for them, but this man who was passing by, this Samaritan, had pity for the man on the side of the road. And he bandaged his wounds. He put him on his donkey and took him into town. And though he too was a busy man and couldn't care for him himself, he took him to the innkeeper and said, "Please take care of him, and I will pay you now and I will pay you later anything else that you need to expend to care for this man." When Jesus was done telling the story, he asked that young man, he said, "Now who was the neighbor?" And the young man, of course, said, "Well, the Samaritan was." And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Now, some of us would hear a story like this and think about, well, if a Samaritan, if someone who of a lower status can act so good and be so caring, so should all of us. But others hear this parable differently. They hear it as saying, don't be too proud to accept help from your enemy when you're down in the ditch. Jesus loved telling these stories that really made people think and debate and ponder. Another time, Jesus told a story about a man who had two sons. And one of those sons went to his father, the younger son went to his father and said, "Father, please give me my share of the inheritance." And the father, knowing exactly what this son was going to do, gave it to him. And that younger son did exactly that. He went and he squandered it. He wasted it. And things were okay until famine hit the land. Food was scarce, jobs were scarce, and he was destitute. And so one day, as he was feeding slop to pigs for some other person, he realized that those pigs were fed better than he was. He was jealous of those pigs and the slop they were eating. And in fact, he realized that his father took better care of his hired hands. And so he resolved to go back to his father, and not to try to get back into the family, but to just simply work for his father like any other hired hand. And the thing is that he didn't really know his father very well. Little did he know that his father had been sitting on the front porch waiting, yearning for him to come home, knowing that he would come home, but yearning and couldn't wait. And as soon as that father saw him coming from afar, he flew off the porch down to his son and wrapped him in a big hug. He dressed him in the best clothes they had. He wouldn't have him as a hired hand. This was his beloved son. And he threw a party. He was so overjoyed to have this son back close again that he threw a party. Everybody was joyful. Everyone except the older brother, who, instead of celebrating, pouted. He refused to share joy over his brother coming home. And his father went out to him and said, "What is going on?" And clearly this older son didn't know his father very well either, because he said, "You know what, Dad? I've worked like a dog for you for all of these years, and you've never given me a single thing." Ooh, that hurt. The father looked at him and said, "Son, you have me. You have been with me all of this time, and all that I have is yours. All that I am is yours." Now, people debate which of the two sons knew his father less, which was the prodigal son, that younger one or the older one. The thing is that when we hear stories like this, sometimes we are so quick to condemn the antagonist, the bad guy in the story, that we miss the protagonist, the good guy. And in this story and so many other stories that Jesus tells, the good guy is God, is that loving father who won't give up on his children. And whenever Jesus tells stories, there's always layers upon layers upon layers, and they hit us differently at different times in our lives. Just as all the stories about Jesus himself and all the stories that we've been recounting, that we've been telling and hearing from the Bible, all of these stories have layers. But each and every one of us, each and every one of them reveals something about who God is and who we are, and what our relationship with God can and should be like, and what God yearns for it to be.